Hey everyone, and welcome to Ricky's Rockin' Reviews. So in preparation for reading The Workshop of Filthy Creation by Richard Gatz, I read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This was published in 1818, and it's just incredible that she wrote this when she was a teenager, because this is one of the best books I've ever read. Not just in horror, but just as far as like literature. I include this in my literature shelf because it's just such a beautifully written story. There's so many things I want to say about it. Like, first of all, the story is very misconstrued among like the general populace because of the 1931 film. There's so many liberties that were taken with that story presented in the film, because the movie is actually inspired by the 1927 play, not necessarily the book. So that's why there's so many differences. For example, we have Frankenstein's monster here, the visage that everyone knows, which is Boris Karloff. And he does not look like this in the story at all. He actually has like really long hair. He's described as having yellow eyes, and not much more is described after that. It's kept very broad. It's just that he's 8 feet tall. He's very strong and nimble and resilient. And it's just kept very surface level. One of the other things that I had, like one of my preconceived notions going into it, was that he was kind of like a bumbling monster, didn't know his own strength, and probably was mute, didn't speak that much, maybe spoke like the Hulk does in some occasions, but that's not the case. Frankenstein's monster, the creature in here, is so eloquently able to express his thoughts and his feelings, and it's so heartbreaking the way he's able to describe what's happening to him and the toil of not having anyone to share a relationship with, because he's basically shunned. And now that gets me into the story. It's called Frankenstein because it's about Victor Frankenstein. He is a very curious and tenacious scientist who's always been trying to get to the forefront of science and trying to, become the best that he can and make the best creation that's going to outshine everybody. And so he stumbles on some occultish books and starts reading about galvanism, which is like the study of electrical currents and stuff through the human body. They were doing like early experiments then, like on frogs' legs and stuff, and running an electrical current through them and making them move. And he was just so infatuated with that. So he started this project in secret, and he started assembling life of his own. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it. He made the creature like humanoid-ish. So he made the creature in his own vision, kind of like how God made us in his image. There's a lot of allusions to the creation story from Genesis, and also Paradise Lost by John Milton is a huge factor in here. It even gets brought up by Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. So just to briefly state, this will kind of contain spoilers. It's such an old story, but I won't go into like too many specifics, just kind of the things that kind of happen, some of the major story beats. So before I get any more into the story, I kind of have to describe the story structure, because it's actually very, very interesting. It's one of the things that I really liked about it. This is a very layered story. So the beginning, you start with 4 letters. So this starts as an epistolary novel. It's between Robert Walton, and he's writing to his sister. He writes 4 letters to her explaining that he's kind of like, he's on an expedition to the north to see the North Pole. He's trying to see what's out there in the north of these unexplored icy areas. So he takes an expedition, and they get stuck in the ice. And when they get stuck, he ends up finding Victor Frankenstein on an ice floe that's kind of just floating out there with a couple of dead dogs, maybe one that's alive. And they bring him in and save his life. He was just on the brink of death. And Robert Walton, he's kind of explaining in his story how he's kind of like different from people, and he's trying to find a healthy, friendly, brotherly relationship with anybody. And he talks about his differences with the crew. Although he's very appreciative of them, he sees himself as different. So when he meets Frankenstein and Victor Frankenstein is starting to speak to him, he recognizes something within Victor, and Victor recognizes something within Robert. And so Victor starts to trust him more. And as he's getting better, Victor starts telling him his story. Victor Frankenstein warns Robert Walton about his ambitions to try to keep things balanced and level-headed, because the same thing can happen to Robert as what happened to Victor. And so Victor starts explaining his story about creating this creature and how it became a tragedy for him and how he regretted it ever since, and how he's just been a heartbroken mess ever since. And that he's explaining that he's actually hunting the monster at that moment. And then so from that point forward, we get the narration of Victor Frankenstein until about halfway through the novel, where we have the confrontation between Victor and the creature. So when Victor finally creates the monster, he is mortified as soon as the creature comes to life. And it's kind of a beautiful sequence, or it's kind of like a disturbing sequence, because the creature is experiencing this blast of light, and he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know his surroundings or anything like that. So it's very reminiscent of when we're born as people. You're in the womb in the dark, and then you're brought out into the light, and then you're kind of questioning everything from that point forward. And so we can relate to the creature in that regard. It's just that he is described as incongruous with life and nature and a mockery of nature. Victor says that himself, and he's just very regretful for bringing this creature into being. And so he automatically hates him because he's kind of disfigured looking, and he's just described as grotesque and wretched. So he automatically hates him, and he leaves his little lab area. He calls it a workshop of filthy creation. And he leaves, and him abandoning the creature is the beginning of his downfall, the beginning of the tragedy. So in the story, Mary Shelley's kind of exploring the idea of nature versus nurture. And I just thought that was very fascinating. There is some tumultuous things that start happening with Victor and his family. His family seems to be, just caught by this curse. A lot of bad things start happening to them, and it might be related to the creature. I'll let you find out. But it goes into crazy places I didn't think it would go. There's kind of like a courtroom drama for a little bit of the story, and you'll just have to read why. But there's deaths that happen. But I just wanted to read this one excerpt that kind of just sums up everything in this conversation when Victor and the creature come face to face. They have this big confrontation. The creature pleads with Victor to let him tell him his side of the story. The creature had an adventure of his own, a miserable adventure of his own, when he was abandoned by Victor. And Victor spent 2 years in remorse because of some deaths that happened. And who or what may have caused those deaths, you'll have to see. But after that, like I said, the creature is on his own, and he kind of explains his side of the story and what happened to him and how he was observing of people, and the people that he did come across hated him. They had this prejudice just because he looked so grotesque and like a monster. And so he does not know love, and that starts to corrupt his soul, which starts as innocent. There's this heartbreaking story where you kind of find out where he's been having his refuge. It's this area between a pig pen and a house where these people live. And the creature is very enamored with his family, and he starts learning a lot from these particular people because he watches them through the window. They're not able to see him, but he can see them. So as I was saying, they have this confrontation since the creature's birth, and the creature is kind of pleading with Victor to kind of hear his side of the story, hear where he's coming from, and to try to plead his case that he's not really a monster. So in here, in this little passage, you're going to get a little taste of what the writing is like. That's kind of one thing I wanted to talk about as well. The prose is, I would describe it as like purple prose. It's just like very beautiful. Everything that's written is just, it just flows off of the tongue. It's it's kind of like theater almost, a little bit. Not quite Shakespearean. It's not as difficult to read, but it's definitely a different cadence than we're used to in like today's novels and stuff like that. So you got to just get used to it. And the words do absolutely fill the pages. So even though it's a skinny book that I have here, I'm not sure who published this version. It has like no markings, but that's probably because this is before copyright laws, so it's in public domain. Anyways, yeah, it's like 224 pages in here, but it's completely dense, so it took me a while to get through it. Anyways, here's the passage I was talking about, and this is the creature talking to Victor. Be calm. I entreat you to hear me before you give vent to your hatred on my devoted head. Have I not suffered enough that you seek to increase my misery? Life, although it may only be an accumulation of anguish, is dear to me, and I will defend it. Remember, thou hast made me more powerful than thyself. My height is superior to thine, my joints more supple. But I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to thee. I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part, the which thou owest me. O Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other, and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even thy clemency and affection is most due. Remember that I am thy creature, and I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrecoverably excluded. I was benevolent and good, misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall be virtuous. So here's the crux of the story. Victor is so ashamed of what he's done, and he is attributing deaths in his family to the creature. And so when he finally is confronted by the creature tells him, since you're not giving me any love or any reciprocity as far as like my gentleness and my willingness to accept you, and everyone I've come across is the same way, please at least make me another creature like myself. He says he's in the same position as Adam was in the Garden of Eden, but yet he is the fallen angel like Lucifer in Paradise Lost. And he even brings it up later on in the story as well. And so he wants his own Eve. And after so much talking and him, the creature explaining to Victor what's going on, Victor kind of senses that, you know, he does owe him something. So even though he's kind of threatened, the creature gives him an ultimatum and basically says, if you don't make my better half, I am going to haunt you and basically like destroy your life. And I know that you're going to get married soon, and I will be there on your wedding night to just like mess you up, basically. So Victor agrees. But then he kind of puts it off, and he's kind of second guessing himself. And then at the end, like towards the end, he's kind of saying, you know what, I shouldn't. He kind of balances everything out in his head. He says, you know, I'm living a miserable life because of what I've done. I'm ashamed. The people that have been affected by this, my family, they're being threatened currently by the creature, and some of them have already died. I'll put it on myself and continue this way, because what's going to happen if I make another creature and either she doesn't accept him because she thinks he's grotesque as well, or and they're just two unhappy monstrous beings running around out there. He didn't want that in the world, or everything goes to plan and they start to procreate and make other monsters. That's the way he's thinking, and so he just cannot have that, and so he rather just deal with the torture that he's going through. So I just thought that was really interesting because I had no idea that was an angle in the story that's presented about halfway through, and then you kind of just see the resolution at the end. It's a tragedy, I'll just say that. But I just thought it was interesting how they had like this Bride of Frankenstein element in here, or Bride of Frankenstein's monster in here, which I wasn't expecting. Overall, I was really, really impressed with the story. I just love the structure, and the writing, and all these like comments on prejudice, nature versus nurture. And there's also one thing in here that I don't know if it's just me seeing into things, but if you guys are familiar with Cormac McCarthy and his love for science and the physicists of our time, like Oppenheimer, he loved that stuff. Infamously, Cormac McCarthy did not want to speak about his writing at all, but he would do interviews talking about his observations, learning about scientists and stuff like that. He was at he spent a lot of time at the Santa Fe Institute, just researching that stuff, and he had a love for Oppenheimer. And there's kind of this relationship in here between Victor Frankenstein and one of his friends, Clerval. Clerval is like a poet and a writer, and Victor Frankenstein is the scientist. But Victor also had this kind of love for language and stuff before he decided to diverge and get into science. So I just kind of pictured that kind of relationship as if it was like Cormac McCarthy and Oppenheimer a little bit. And Oppenheimer's biography is called like The Modern Prometheus, and this story, Frankenstein, is also called Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus. So I thought that was really interesting, and that was kind of in the back of my mind the whole time. Another one of the tragic things in here is that Victor Frankenstein and the creature are so much alike. When you're in their heads and they're talking or having their monologues, internal monologues and such, they're very similar people. It's just a shame that they didn't get along. It's all Victor's fault, of course. So I guess the moral of the story is don't judge a book by its cover. And there's much more to dig into this. This is a very, very dense novel. But those are just my quick thoughts. If I have any more interesting things to say, I'll make more videos about this. But it's definitely one of the best books I've ever read, that's for sure. And I highly recommend it. I think it deserves all of its praise. I think it definitely deserves its place in our culture. And I'm reading the Workshop of Filthy Creation right now, and I'm really enjoying this too. I'm already starting to compare those two stories, and I think it's just this one's really good too. I'm really, really enjoying it. And I have these comparisons that I want to make already, but you'll just have to wait for that review. That one's going to be really exciting to talk about because I can compare the two novels. So look forward to that, and just look forward to any other random reviews I do. I do literature, I do horror, sci-fi, superheroes, all kinds of books. So just give me a like and subscribe. That would really help me out. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.